Look, everything in Washington has been a lie.
Welcome to the Bon Robin channel. Prepare to be shocked awake. And we're off to another insightful ramble.
But I want to say that this show really only exists because of a couple of assholes. One of them is named Butch Robinson, also known as Bond Robin, and also known as Archbreach Simeon. And the other one is known as the Paleolithic philosopher Troglodyte. And what I mean by assholes is that's the kind of person you want shoulder to shoulder with you in war. You want a mean sumbitch. You want an asshole. Because a namby-pamby little pussy is going to cost you your life.
This is the greatest time to be alive. We are going to win. Truth warriors will succeed. We will absolutely run roughshod. We will vanquish. We will destroy. We will decimate. We will obliterate, ablate, bowdlerize, and amend permanently that of the deep state.
America needs its own demarxification program, and that demarxification program has to start with people like Frank Schaeffer and other white Marxists and communists as well, who do not love our hero Donald Trump, the loving, caring man who is our president. They must leave en masse and stop troubling decent, hard-working, moral American people.
But this right here, bullshit, okay?
We have adopted his lies instead of any truth baseline. The Republican Party is in hock to a third-rate, goofball, grifter, con man who would have only been successful in the United States from the mid-20th century on, when our literacy rate declined, television took over, and the whole culture became pornified on every fucking level. Sorry about the language. Thank you. My name is Frank Schaeffer.
But this right here, bullshit, okay?
When leftists aren't in control, violence is their response.
I think that I'm going to call this video Post-Civilized Britain. It's really an addendum to the videos that I did 2 days ago, Boris and Natasha Strike Back, and Trump and Putin, the diabolical twins. It is a fact that Britain has grown post-civilized. It's moving into an era of barbarism and increasing levels of barbarism that are accepted as normal and natural. It's what you get when you have a post-Christian pagan society under extreme pressure from Islam. A post-Christian society cannot stand against Islam, so the barbarism of Islam is ultimately what you get. Now, I said this in the video 2 days ago and reiterated aspects of it yesterday, and I know that some people think this is not real, that this sex trafficking, this extreme level of abuse of children is not real. I mean, the mainstream media in the U.S. laughs at it, and they created this little Pizzagate scam so that idiots use the term Pizzagate, and then everybody writes it off because, we can say that there really was something there, the Tony Podesta emails. Well, whatever it is that was there, they used it against us. Folks, so much is being exposed I mean, clearly being exposed, that we don't have to resort to slogans that are easily discredited, like chemtrails. Well, chemtrails, you go look up chemtrails, they'll tell you it's a conspiracy theory, but go look up geoengineering, and that's a scientific fact. So you go look up Pizzagate, and you're telling everybody about Pizzagate, and they go look up Pizzagate, and what do they find? They find a bunch of conspiracy theory, a bunch of conjecture. But if you talk about child trafficking, and people go look that up, they begin to find facts. And so I'm telling you, give up the slogans, know what you're talking about, speak what you're saying clearly without being manipulated so that your message is avoided, so that people hear what you say and immediately dismiss it. We have to learn to do this better. And when I'm criticizing Britain, don't think that I'm just criticizing Britain. I mean, whatever is going on in Britain, except for the grace of God, will be here, and we're not far behind them. We haven't been far behind them socially, as their civilization has decayed and fallen apart. And in the U.S., we have a little bit different story, where a huge amount of it's decayed and falling apart, but then there is a huge resistance to it. Now, with Brexit, you can say there was resistance in Britain, but I'm not sure that it's the spiritual resistance that we have to have if we plan to overcome this very deep and real and serious evil. So here's the hypocrisy. While Theresa May is complaining about human rights and civil rights in Russia, think about what the state of the civilization is with all the abuse of human rights in Britain. Theresa May and others of this genetically thin, these genetically thin morons, talked about Russian human rights abuses. Do you know what the sole human rights abuse is that had this demonic horde up in arms against Russia? It's not a human rights abuse at all. It is Russia's refusal to allow their own children to be trafficked, to be mind-controlled, to be indoctrinated into sodomite LGBTQ XYZ abuse. Russian abuse of human rights in a nutshell, making gay propaganda to minors a felony. That's their horrible, horrible human rights abuse. That's the nutshell of it. That's the crux of it. Compare that to the British child trafficking that they cannot stop. The British pedophile sex grooming gangs that they cannot stop. And the growing Sharia rape culture that they cannot stop. Putin stopped Western adoptions, realizing that pretty blonde and blue-eyed Russian children were being adopted to traffic, to sexually enslave, to abuse, and even to kill in Luciferian New World Order ceremonies. So which country is really the human rights abuser? Russia, that protects their children, or Britain and the U.S., where to protect children from gay propaganda is considered here an act of hate?
If you read one book this year, read Easy Meat, the definitive study of the Muslim child rape gangs in Britain by Peter McLaughlin. Now, is it a minority or a majority of Muslim men who are doing this? Well, what do the numbers say? First, look at Rotherham. The J report said that Rotherham had over 1,400 victims of these gangs. Rotherham Borough's 240,000 population is recorded as being 3.4% Asian, which is PC speak for 2.5% Muslim. That is 6,000 Muslims in the whole of Rotherham Borough. But the number of rape-aged Muslim men, predominantly men aged 17 to 40, according to a suppressed Birmingham police report, is about 14% of that total. That means that Rotherham had about 1,400 girls prostituted out to a client base of approximately 850 men. And maybe it was just a few Muslim men raping hundreds and hundreds of little girls. No, wrong answer. Think about it. Who has more sexual partners, the prostitute or the client? Sex is her job and she's forced onto it by the pimp. The latest Keithley case convicted 12 men on one girl. The latest Rochdale victim talked of hundreds of men on her. Now, maybe it's just Rotherham and it's not happening anywhere else in the country. No, wrong answer. Tell that to the girls of Accrington, Barking, Birmingham, Blackburn, Blackpool, Bradford, Bristol, Burton, Chesham, Derby, Ipswich, Keighley, Leeds, Leicester, London, Manchester, that's halfway through, Middlesbrough, Nelson, Oldham, Oxford, Peterborough, Preston, Rochdale, Rotherham, Sheffield, Skipton, Slough and Telford. As one social worker said, if you think this isn't happening in your town, you're just not looking for it. Then there's all the helpers, the kebab shops where the girls are introduced, the B&Bs where they're raped, the taxi drivers who ferry them around, the young Romeos who chat them up, the thugs and the money men. Now that is the numbers saying that there's a majority of Muslim men doing this. That's not me saying it. Second, look at Operation Sanctuary, which was carried out by the police in the tiny Northumberland town of Bedlington, a town you've never heard of until now. Overwhelmingly, Muslim men were charged in relation to this crime, and that operation saw over 120 people arrested. And an arrest means that the police have enough evidence reasonably to suspect the person of having committed this crime. Now, Northumberland Council says that the whole county contains 1,000 Muslims. That's about 140 rape-age Muslim men in the whole county. So in one operation, in one small town, the police had evidence reasonably to suspect 6 out of 7 rape-age Muslim men across the whole county of committing this crime. That isn't a minority. 6 out of 7 is a landslide majority, and that is what the numbers suggest. Third, there's the estimate of 1 million victims nationally from Rotherham MP Sarah Champion. Now, 1 million victims means twice as many victims as the 500,000 rape-aged Muslim men across the whole of Britain. Again, that's not me saying it's a majority of Muslim men doing this. That is the numbers saying that it's a majority. And those numbers come from the PC authorities, some of whom have worked very hard to cover up this crime. But don't take my word for it. Read the evidence yourself. Read Easy Meat by Peter McLaughlin, a superb book. Better still, go to Amazon, buy a copy and send it to Dame Lowell Goddard, who is leading the public inquiry into child sexual abuse. Don't let them say that they weren't told.
Commissioner. Obviously one of your priorities is protecting children against child abuse, but sexual abuse.
Yeah.
We saw when we, took evidence before that obviously this is increasing very worryingly. I wondered, what is the position in the metropolitan area, in terms of grooming gangs of the sort that are very topical at the moment that we've seen in other cities? How much of a part of this particular function does that take up for you? Is it something you see in the metropolitan area, or is it growing, or that particular part that we saw in, for example, Rochdale, Rotherham, Bristol, Oxford?
I'm afraid I can't tell you how many sort of active, and they would be proactive investigations of that sort that we have, but because awareness has gone up so much recently, but within our staff and also, of course, within other public authorities and in the public mind as well. You will perhaps have seen some coverage earlier this week in relation to East London and concerns around children in Stratford. Doesn't suggest there's a network, but it does suggest that children are being groomed out of particular kind of locations, given I'll come away from the specific, but encouraged to get involved in criminality or sexual relationships through sweets and offers of this and that and the other, and people actually just being interested in them perhaps when nobody else is. It's a really complicated area. I don't know how many current investigations we have. It is growing, there's no doubt about that, but a large amount of the growth, in my view, is about raised awareness.
Is about?
It's about raised awareness, undoubtedly. And it's just, it's not the same phenomenon, but it's slightly similar to, the viewing of indecent images. You will have seen perhaps a report not long ago that suggested there are up to 900,000 people in this country who are either would be classified as paedophiles or have an interest in children sexually and will be potentially be viewing child sexual abuse images. For us, we have an ever-increasing number of referrals in relation to that, and I'm expecting to have future referrals in relation to organised or semi-organised grooming of children. But I don't think this is a sort of a phenomenon that was invented in the last few years. It really wasn't. It's been part of our society probably for centuries and centuries and centuries. It's hard to know exactly whether it's really going up and what's changing.
Yes, but I'm talking specifically where we've had these shocking situations that have seemingly been tolerated for about 20 or 30 years. In fact, the time is actually going further and further back in time. So you're saying that pretty much those sort of patterns are not really happening in London? Or are you saying...
what sort of pattern?
Well, for example, where we've had particularly girls, white girls, being abused by mostly Asian men.
Mostly by Asian men. That's what he says. That's what he has to say when he means Muslim men. Were he to say Muslim men in that forum, that little police officer, commissioner who's sitting there would have to arrest him. And he would be charged with a hate crime and would wind up being fined and possibly doing jail time if he simply said the problem is, in this instance, Islam. Now, Islam is not the extent of the trafficking. When they're talking about, it's not a network. Well, sure it is. It's a network of Muslim men. That's one set of the rape culture, the sexual grooming culture, but then there is this whole other side of it that has to do with the aristocracy, and they don't ever want to go there, involved with members of Parliament, both the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and right into the royal family. And if you don't think that's true, you haven't been watching, because it's been going on for decades.
Basically in quite organised groups that we've seen over the north and in the Midlands. Is that actually happening in London?
We've undoubtedly had and do have now investigations into organised grooming of children, yes.
And where is that happening in London?
I genuinely can't tell you today, and I'm not sure it would be appropriate for me while we have a proactive investigation going on to say it's in such.
I don't think you could answer that specifically,
but
Commissioner.
That's not really.
No, but I think, with respect,
I understand the trend of your debate. No, I understand your thrust.
Because what we don't want again is yet another situation where people are saying, well, where were the police?
So I'm not aware, personally, I'm not aware of a matter which has been brought to our attention where we think we are sitting here thinking, oh my goodness, we've had some knowledge of that for decades or years and years and years. What I am aware of is this is a current and definite phenomenon in the country, not precisely, I wouldn't share your words of describing it, but children being groomed in organised or semi-organised.
Why would you not share my way of describing it when it seems quite clear?
Well, I would describe it as children are vulnerable to grooming. That is going on. Sometimes that's in a very organised and sometimes in a semi-organised way. And it is happening in London as well. And we have a number of very skilled investigators who are working on proactive investigations in that field.
Okay, I would say that I don't quite understand why you can't take my characterisation, which is absolutely factual and clear, why you don't accept that.
I'm saying it's not words I would use.
The disagreement in phrasing that you think you've heard, Peter, and then we can kind of finish it at that.
Yes, exactly. I'm not just constantly trying to make a point, one that you might think I would typically make, but the fact is that it's to say that I don't recognise this situation and to somehow smooth it over is what led Commissioner to thousands of young girls being shockingly abused over about 20 years at least.
Leave it at that.
No,
and
no,
just,
no.
and just breathe.
If
No,
it
no,
were
that's
the
you
boot
make,
were on the other foot, Commissioner, if this, quite rightly, quite rightly too, if this were groups of white men abusing specifically Muslim young girls, this would be treated probably as a hate crime, and also it would be treated very specifically in a particular way, which it should be. But why are you therefore simply not taking on board what is obviously the fact that is reported every day?
Okay, yeah, if you like to respond to that last point.
So
I
may have misheard and misunderstood what you said, but
Now bear with me, because I'm going to repeat myself, because I want you to understand the situation, because I'm going to teach you a lesson about the situation that is really pertinent, we need to understand. And so repetition, help get the thoughts out there. I don't mean to bore you. Just take a moment and let me repeat what the situation is. Theresa May and others of this genetically thin, these genetically thin morons, talked about Russian human rights abuses. Do you know what the sole human rights abuse is that had this demonic horde up in arms against Russia? It's not a human rights abuse at all. It is Russia's refusal to allow their own children to be trafficked, to be mind-controlled, to be indoctrinated into sodomite LGBTQ XYZ abuse. Russian abuse of human rights in a nutshell, making gay propaganda to minors a felony. That's their horrible, horrible human rights abuse. That's the nutshell of it. That's the crux of it. Compare that to the British child trafficking that they cannot stop, the British pedophile sex grooming gangs that they cannot stop, and the growing Sharia rape culture that they cannot stop. Putin stopped Western adoptions, realizing that pretty blonde and blue-eyed Russian children were being adopted to traffic, to sexually enslave, to abuse, and even to kill in Luciferian New World Order ceremonies. So which country is really the human rights abuser? Russia, that protects their children, or Britain and the U.S., where to protect children from gay propaganda is considered here an act of hate? Okay, now we're going to teach by analogy. When you have a culture and a society and a government run by morons, like Trump said, stupid people. We've been stupid. Herman Cain, stupid people are ruining our country. Well, stupid people are in charge in Britain. Not to say they're not in charge here too, but we're talking about Britain now. Stupid people are in charge in Britain. And they don't have the slightest idea, the slightest inclination how to make their bed and clean their own room. But yet, they're out there storming and being passionate and being social justice warriors and yelling and screaming about the unmade beds and mess in Russia. And so I'm asking you, do they have the right to do that? I mean, does it make any sense? Can we accept their judgment? I mean, they're looking at a situation that is thousands of miles away, of which they are ignorant. But yet, they're on the warpath to clean things up in Russia when their own house, their own room, their own bed is filthy, is dangerous and deadly. It is not friendly to children. It grinds children up. And they're going to talk about human rights abuses in Russia? So, learned by this analogy, the British society, the British government, all these people yelling and screaming about the deplorable conditions of human rights in Russia are exactly like is described in this analogy.
So, on the one hand, you say, look, you don't have a clue what you're doing, stay out of it, right? But we live in democratic systems where it's our responsibility not to stay out of it. So how do you manage that? Because you seem to be saying...
With humility.
Humility, right. But humility doesn't preclude activism.
Generally, it does, yes. But,
Why?
But
Why
that
does it have
doesn't mean that I'm saying that there is no situations under which political action or activism is justified, because there are clearly situations under which it's justified. But it's not the first thing that you should be taught how to do when you're an 18-year-old person going to university and you don't know a damn thing.
So I don't doubt that there's callow youth. I don't doubt that people have a lot to learn. And that,
yeah, and they're not learning it from their professors either.
That may be true. That may be true. But you're clearly, I mean, a big part of your narrative comes from that energy of resisting that kind of, you know,
circumventing it.
Circumventing, but you're also saying, you know, these people who complain about the world, they should just focus on their own, what they can control themselves and work within that space.
To begin with.
To begin with, but equally, there is a slight derision in the tone about people who actually care about bigger than self issues.
It's not slight.
Okay, it's big then. So, bigger than self problems, which arguably...
They don't care about them. They just act like, they're just acting out the delusion that they care about them generally.
You seem to be caught
I
up
watch
in
activists, the activists at the universities.
Right.
I know what they're like.
And we've seen the videos and we know that kind of confrontation.
Yes.
And I don't
We've seen
doubt,
Wilfrid Laurier, for example.
I've seen many, but I don't doubt that there are those who are like that. But there are many millions more, and I mentioned Gandhi, but you know, arguably...
You can't use him as an example.
Okay, well, Buddha, for example.
Or
Buddha left his wife and child.
Yeah, but you can't use them as examples.
Okay,
First of all, like Buddha's like Christ. It's like, well, there's Christ. It's, yeah. What do you mean?
No,
there's Christ in university activists?
No, but there's...
Like,
well, there's... so Martin Luther King, can I use him?
Yeah.
Right? So Martin Luther King had an affair. It was quite well known. You know, his personal life was a bit complex.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't say that, you know, he had to sort that out before he went to sort of try and deal with civil rights in the US. So I'm trying to get at the core of the tension.
No, I would say that his own personal faults didn't preclude his social responsibility. Right. And it really is important to get that straight. But I would say that his own personal faults served as a detriment to his overall mission. Right. And then I'm not, believe me, I am not saying that if I was in Martin Luther King's position, I would have done a better job. It's like, I am not saying that, man, not in the least. But back to the idea of sorting yourself out. It's like, well, first of all, it's a lot harder to do than you think. Yeah. I mean, I've run students through this experiment. We used to do existential experiments in my Maps of Meaning class, and so the existential experiment was identify one thing that you think that isn't going well that you could fix, and then go try to fix it. And then just document what happens. It's like, well, you know, it's way hard. So let me tell you a brief story. I had one student whose mother had died, and the house was chaotic, and no one had picked up the necessary domestic responsibilities. And so he decided, and that wasn't good for anyone, and so he decided that he was going to step into the shoes of his mother. Well, God, I mean, it just provoked a complete bloody war in the household, you know, because who the hell did he think he is, and why do we need that, and why are you doing that, and aren't you making us lonesome for Mom, and, you know, why do you think that you're better than us by taking up this responsibility? And so it's like, I'm going to go buy groceries. That was his plan. It's like, well, you know, that's a hell of a lot harder than you think. Yeah. And so, number one, cleaning up your room is proper because maybe you can manage it, although probably you can't, because you could also extend that by beautifying it. But number two, it involves way more forces than you think. Yeah. And so, because to get your house in order is very, very difficult.
But if it's so difficult, and I need to spend most of my energy and time dealing with that, who are the people who are going to be doing the other work that needs to be done socially and culturally and politically?
Well, hopefully competent people, with any luck. People who've already done that.
So okay, that's interesting. So you're saying it's a necessary transition. You're saying there's something about the life...
Jesus, I'm saying something simple. If you can't make your damn bed, quit waving placards at corporations. It's like, Jesus, it's like, seriously, man. It's like, what the hell? What makes you can't get this tiny little part of the world that's actually right at your feet, functional. You have contempt for it. It's just my bedroom.
That seems like gratuitous caricature of people. I mean, look...
It's not gratuitous.
Well, their flip on that is, look, why should I waste my time making my bed when we've got to deal with these problems in the world? You know,
because you risk inflating your own ego by dealing with the problems of the world. So, it's like it's the cathedral problem again. It's like, oh, I should be at the center of the universe.
Right. So
it's like, yeah, well, maybe not.
I'm trying to find a resolution of this that goes beyond the existing cultural conflict around it. Because no doubt people need to attend to their own projection and their own limitations and have humility and some psychological insight and work harder on what they're directly responsible for. I don't doubt that. But I am concerned with a message that says that's all you should be doing, and until you figure that out, don't do anything else.
No, I'm not saying that's all you should be doing.
But you are saying you have to do it
that
first.
Before you can do that, you should be very leery of assuming that when you try to do something else, you won't just make it worse. And you will.
Right.
Look, I've dealt with people who've dealt with complex systems for a very long period of time.
Right.
And I know the difference between someone who can make a complex system better and someone who will make a complex system worse. And most people will make a complex system worse.
Okay.
That's for sure.
So that's okay, that's good, because that's coming to the question of development and the question of human maturation and the question of what it means to unfold throughout the lifespan. So just to try and distill that last point, you're sort of saying don't begin and end with your own responsibility of cleaning your room and sorting your personal and immediate affairs out, but realize that until you can do that, you may be lacking certain forms of competence that might make you doubt whether you should be quite so visceral and adamant about your political views.
Precisely that, yes. And it's exactly the opposite of what students are taught in universities.
But you're not saying don't care about those things or don't act on them, but just while you're doing them, attend to your own limitations and competencies.
Well, I'm saying you should be aware of your own competence and your limits.
Right.
And that's especially true if you're very young, because like, what the hell do you know? You haven't done anything.
Right.
You're like, I tell 18-year-olds, 6 years ago you were 12. It's like, what the hell do you know?
Right.
You're under the care of your family or the state. You haven't established an independent existence. You haven't had children. You haven't started a business. You haven't taken responsibility for anything. You don't have a degree. You haven't finished your courses. You don't know how to read. You can't think. You can't speak. You're ill-kempt. You don't know how to present yourself. Well, Jesus, you know, and it's just not right to tell people in that situation that they should go out and change the socioeconomic structure of the culture.
What those children or young people observe are not wise adults managing complex systems adeptly. They see people giving subsidies to fossil fuel companies. They see people
they see activists
injustice.
teaching them at university who are no smarter than they are.
Jordan,
And they think,
like,
well, I
with
can
respect,
do that.
You're so
It's
hung
like,
up on the university experience. Like, we keep coming back to this issue of the activists at the university, which is clearly very salient for you. But for those who are not there, it's frankly alienating. Because your other work is so fantastic, but it keeps coming back to this narrative of these slightly callow students who are maybe a bit over-enthusiastic about a political issue.
Well, I'm more concerned with their professors than with the students.
Okay, also the
and
professors
I'm concerned
supporting
about
them.
the professors because they've completely corrupted the humanities.
Right.
And the humanities are the core of the university. And by corrupting the humanities, they're corrupting the fundamental structure of our civilization. And they're spreading that out into the general culture.
Right.
And there's no excuse for that.
They may be doing that, but simultaneously others are corrupting the ecological foundations, the social foundations. Democracy is arguably dying. There are real problems that are existential threats at a different level.
There's a
Multiple,
whole large variety of existential
And I don't
threats.
think that's happening principally because some people are being taught feminist theory in the University of Toronto. It's not that. It's something else, much bigger and broader and deeper, that when people raise these issues, you focus on that small issue, not the big ones that they're worried about.
Well, it depends on the issue, I suppose. I would say that...
climate change, for example, just for argument's sake.
Well, what should I say about climate change?
Well, what should you do
Did
if
you
you're
drive
young?
here?
If you're no, I didn't.
What did you do? How did you get here?
I took public transport.
Okay, well, you know.
But that's not really. But again, that's hardly the point. I mean,
Well, no, it is the point.
Well,
it is the point because it's part of the problem with climate change is irreducible complexity.
Right.
It's like you know there's a cost to our existence, and the cost is externalization.
Yeah.
Right, externalization of costs, and we don't know how to manage that.
Right.
And I would say, should we be concerned about it? It's like, yeah, absolutely. Do we know how to be concerned about it? Not really.
Not really, right. So then how do we learn? That becomes the question, right? So the younger generation who are
I
likely
can give
to
you
be
an example.
more directly affected, the kinds of people in developing countries and younger people who feel the pinch of this all the more because they can see, for example, New York, the chance of it being underwater by the end of the century is not negligible. And therefore, they're looking for a response that really matters to them. And when you think about responsibility,
That's
they think,
easy. That's easy.
No, but their view is don't patronize me about my bedroom when I've got the planet to save.
I'm not patronizing you. I think
No,
your
not
bedroom
me.
is
I'm
important.
just saying that there is a
Is
a voice.
No, I understand. I think your bedroom is important.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they
No,
might
but I
too,
seriously
but they think the
that.
whole planet is more important. They're more concerned about that. And why is
Your
that wrong?
bedroom is a microcosm of the planet.
Right. Well, tell us about that then. Why
Well,
is that the case?
let's go back to the climate issue here first, because there's this guy that I'm aware of. His name is Boyan Slat, and I'm going to talk to him in the relatively near future, I think. And he's a model for young people. He went out scuba diving when he was 17, and there was a lot of plastic, and that sort of bothered him. And then he started thinking about manta rays and how they move through the water, and then he noticed that most of the plastic was in the top 6 inches, and then he thought, I wonder if I could build a machine that was like a manta ray that would float on top of the water. And anyways, to make a long story short, he's devised a way to rid 50% of the plastic in the world's oceans within 5 years, and has spent the last 6 years developing that and is well on the way to implementing it, and it looks like it might work, and he's going to be able to make a profit from it, just to add that extra bit of punch. Yeah. And so Boyan Slat, I would say, it's like, I don't know if his room was clean or not, but there was something about him that was dead on, because when he looked at a problem like that, he thought, I'm not going to go out there and tell a bunch of other people what they're doing wrong so that they can solve it. I'm going to bloody well fix it. And that's what I'm telling young men in particular to do. Although, you know, if young women want to do that, it's like, great, more power to them. But, you know, people say, well, I'm taking climate change seriously. I'm going out to protest. Like, you're not taking it seriously. That's not serious. Serious is you're going to devote 80 hours of your life to it for the rest of your life, right? You're going to work on that so intently that you're not even going to think about anything else. Like, that's serious.
So what you care about.
So what is the takeaway? Here is the takeaway. When you see congressmen and senators, presidents and statesmen, members of Parliament, in the House of Commons, the House of Lords, when you see famous actors and whoever else pontificating about the human rights situations and the humanitarian situations in foreign countries, just take a look at the cultures of death they have created and the hedonistic societies that they have fostered, and the meat grinder that those societies are for our young, for them physically in human trafficking, and psychically with all of this Luciferian bullshit that they're exposed to. And when you look at that, and you listen to them, you know that they're just exactly like that teenager complaining about, you know, global warming, complaining about whatever that they're going to go fix, and they don't know how to comb their hair, they don't know how to groom themselves, they don't know how to make their own freaking bed. That's how serious we should take them. In other words, not seriously at all, except they wield great power. And in that wielding of great power, we have to stop them.